Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 12 of the video series where we're taking a look at all the different plugins put out by Topaz Labs. In this episode, we're going to take a look at Denoise 6. Now, those of you that have been watching the videos in this series might remember that we did take a look at Denoise 5 in episode 1, but Topaz has added quite a bit to Denoise 6, so I think it's worth doing a new video on it. Now, just to take an overview of what they have added to Denoise 6, we go over to their website and we can see the system requirements and the file type support are pretty much the same. But one new feature is it's now a standalone program. You do not have to use Denoise 6 as a plugin, but if you're like me and prefer to use it as a plugin, it does still work that way. So I use it as a plugin in Lightroom and Photoshop and it works great. It has batch processing. Those of you that are wedding and event photographers probably welcome this new addition to Denoise. It saves a lot of time when you're doing a lot of images just to do them in batches. It has camera specific presets. I really like this new addition, and we're going to talk about that more specifically once we get into the app. They've also added high resolution monitor support, and they've added this EXIF data view, and I'll show you that when we get into the program as well. Now, I think the easiest thing to do is just to process a couple images. And we have this image here of this bird, and I think this might be a typical image that someone might want to reduce the noise in. If I zoom in, you can see it's not terrible, but there is some noise there. And we're going to send it over to Denoise 6 to reduce the noise. Now, what I recommend you do is whatever program you use, process your image as you normally would. In this case, I use Lightroom. So I did all the processing in Lightroom that I normally would have done, except for one thing, detail. Do not sharpen your image before you send it over to Denoise, because when you're sharpening the image, you're actually going to be sharpening the noise. And it makes it harder for any program you're using to reduce the noise to actually reduce the noise. So don't sharpen your image. And of course, we're not going to do any noise reduction in Lightroom. We're using Denoise for that. Now, by default, when you import raw files into Lightroom, Lightroom does add some sharpening to the image. You can see it's at 25. That is by default. I suggest you even turn that down. Bring that right down to 0. So we're not going to do any sharpening at all. Afterwards, after we're done in Denoise, we'll sharpen the image. All right, so I want to use Denoise 6 as a plugin. So all I have to do really is right-click on the image itself, go down to Edit In, and we're going to go down to Topaz Denoise 6. Now this is also slightly different. You might remember that with many of the Topaz plugins, we had to use their free app Fusion Express 2 to access them as a plugin in Lightroom. You don't have to do that anymore with Denoise 6. It's right here, and we could access it that way. Now, because this is a raw file, Topaz Denoise does not handle raw files, so we have to convert it to a TIFF. And I'm going to accept the default settings here. Now, if you're processing a JPEG or a TIFF file for that matter, I strongly suggest you do process a copy of the image. That way, if you screw anything up in Denoise, you still have the original image to fall back on. All right. It's kind of the typical Topaz Labs workspace. Right in the middle, we have our image. To the left, we have presets. To the right, we have the actual settings where we could actually adjust our image. And here and there, we have some things we'll talk about. First of all, right here, we have the before and after view is this little button right there. There's the original look and there's the process look. Now, obviously, we didn't do anything yet. You also could do that by just left-clicking on the image itself, and you'll look at the original and the processed image. We have these different views. By default, Topaz Denoise sets you up in a 200% view. They recommend that you get in very close and look at the image, to see the noise. Usually what I will do is if I have a subject in my shot that has an eyeball, it could be a person or in this case a bird, I like looking at the eyeball. I like making sure the eyeball's sharp, so I don't want to do too much processing to the image that I'm losing some sharpness. And that's kind of the trade-off you have with any noise reduction software. It's kind of a battle. How much detail do you want to lose in order to reduce noise. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. You also could go over to this navigator and move this little box around. In this case, I'd move it right over the eye of the bird. Now, as for views, I prefer the 100% view. That's just personal preference. You may like to be zoomed in a little more or a little less. That's up to you. Below this navigator window, we have preview modes, brighten modes, and the actual settings in these three tabs, and we're going to talk about that more in detail in a minute. If you don't like what you did, you could reset everything to get back to your original image. Over here on the left, we have this little camera. As you're processing your image, you might get to a point and you like what you did, but you want to try some other stuff. Take a snapshot of where you are in your processing. That way, if you're processing along and you don't like what you did, you could easily go backwards or forwards to that previous snapshot that you took. Next to that is a little gear. If you processed your image and you really like the processing you do and you find you use those settings quite often, you could create a user-defined preset. Click on the gear and click on Save, and you'd create a new preset. You also could delete any of the presets that you have created, or you could import presets that were created by someone else, or you could export the presets you created to share with other people. So that's all available by that gear. Below that, we have this menu button, and this is the typical Topaz Labs menus. We have preferences, updates, enter your product key, and things like that, right with that menu button. Now, usually what my workflow consists of when I'm doing anything in Denoise is I pick a preset. One of the new things about version 6 is it has these camera specific presets. Now in this case, if you look here, this is another new thing in Topaz Denoise. This little bar here is our EXIF data, and you can see this is a shot at f of 5.6, 1/199th of a second, which I'm sure it was 1/200th of a second. ISO 100 with the Nikon D800E. So we're going to come over to our presets. We're just going to click that little drop down and we're going to go to Nikon. And we're going to look for our Nikon D800E. Now the D800 isn't listed, but we have a D800E is not listed, but there are D800s listed. Now the ISO 100 is not one of the presets. And I would say don't get too hung up on that. Just yesterday, I was doing an image and I shot it with the D800E and it was at ISO 800. And I clicked on the preset of ISO 800 and it looked okay. But then I tried 1600, 3200, and it looked much better at 3200. It got rid of most of the noise and I didn't lose any detail. So don't worry about it that much if the exact ISO you actually shot the image at is not listed. For this image, it was ISO 100, so I'm just going to try the lowest ISO available for my camera is ISO 400. Now also, if your camera isn't listed, your make, your model, whatever isn't listed, I wouldn't worry about that too much either. In the presets, you could go back to the old Topaz Denoise 5 presets and use those. And of course, those will work great. So just, don't get too hung up if your camera isn't listed. Also, Topaz has announced that in every single update of Denoise that they're going to be including new presets. So if your camera isn't listed today, perhaps it will be tomorrow. Now, I tried this ISO 400 preset. It takes a second to process. Now, your computer hopefully will process quicker than mine. Although I do have a fairly fast computer, when I run this screen recording software in the background, it kind of bogs everything down. So here is the processed version. I'm going to click on this little button to look at the before version, the original version. Let go. Click again. There's the processed version. You could also click right on the image. There's before, let go, after. I don't see barely anything changing there. So ISO 400 didn't do anything. So I'm going to go to the D800 ISO 800 and see what that looks like. And now I could see some changes. There's before, there's after, there's before, there's after. I'm looking for two things when I do this. I look for the actual noise that is being reduced, and then I look at detail. In this bird, I'm going to be looking at like this feather pattern, and I want to make sure that I'm not losing detail. You will always lose detail when you reduce noise, but you don't want to lose so much detail that you can't get it back when you sharpen the image later. So D800, it did get rid of some of the noise, and I did lose a little bit of the detail. So we're going to go to the D800 ISO 1600. We'll jump up to that. And that did get rid of more noise, and the detail loss isn't that great, so that's not bad. Let's go to 3200. Now, just at first glance, that didn't seem to do any improvement over the 1600. So with my workflow, I will just go back to the 1600 and I use that as my starting point. So for this image, I'm going to use the preset D800 ISO 1600. That is my starting point. Now I'm going to refine it a little bit by doing some adjustments over here on the right panel. First, we have these preview modes. Now we're in the color RGB mode. We're looking at the image. That's this RGB mode. You could look at it in black and white by clicking this Luma button, so that sucks out all the color. If you want to just look at the color, you click on this color button. You can see it's kind of got this gray palette and color. Now, all these buttons here, they might help you on some images see the noise a bit more readily. On this image, I don't think any of these buttons are going to do much. Go to this red button here, and this kind of makes anything that I guess is red more, or has a lot of red in it, I guess a little more brighter than something that didn't. And similarly for blue, but nothing there really helps. So I'm just going to stay in the RGB mode. And to tell you the truth, I always stay in the RGB mode. I almost never click around. I might go into the Luma mode once in a while, but I stay in this RGB mode. Also, I try to position, as I mentioned, over an eye. I also like to look at part of the image that is a little brighter and a little darker so I could see everything. And the reason for that is when we actually get into the noise reduction sliders, there's individual sliders for the darker areas and for the lighter areas. Now, depending on your image, you might not be able to see the noise very well because your image is a little dark. If it is, you could auto brighten your preview. And you could do that by clicking here strong, and that'll make it brighter. Now this will not affect your final result. If I export this right now, this will not look this way. This is just to help you better see the noise. So we could go to strong or normal and you know, maybe more readily see the noise. And I definitely can see more the noise when I'm in strong mode. But for this demonstration, I'm going to leave that off right now. We're going to go to the noise reduction tab first, and there's a number of sliders. This first slider, overall strength, this is kind of like the master volume control. If this is turned all the way down, the sliders below it won't do anything. All right, so that's kind of like the same. So you can see before and after is pretty much the same, even though these sliders are all moved around. So the overall strength, you know, bring that up, and hopefully your preset brought it up enough where you could actually see it affect your image. If you go up too high on your overall strength, you will smooth the image quite, you know, the noise out, but you're going to really blur out the image. You're not getting any more detail. So again, this is kind of the battle you fight when you're trying to get rid of noise. You want to get rid of as much of the noise as possible, but still retain some of the detail in your image. So generally speaking, I will leave this pretty much at first, right where my preset put it. So in this case, the ISO 1600, it has the overall strength set at 0.14. So I'm just going to leave it there for now. All right. Also, if you hover over any of the sliders, you'll get a tooltip that'll come up and will tell you exactly what you're adjusting. So the next slider below that is the shadow noise. And you can see we have shadow over here, and we have some more highlights over here. We have shadow here. So this is a good image to really see what these sliders do. Now, the weird thing I found about these sliders is you would think sometimes moving it to the right would reduce noise, and moving it to the left means you're not reducing the noise as readily. It doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it does. It's odd. So what I do is I kind of pop it around to start. I do these larger adjustments first. So I'll just jump way down, and I'll look up in the darker areas, and I'll see, you know, how it adjusted the shadows. And then I'll jump way up, and I'll see Is it better or worse? Well, obviously that's worse. All right, so I'm going to move that down. And that smoothed it out nicely. And then I start refining it a little bit. I'll just keep bouncing it around left or right until I find kind of a sweet spot. Now, of course, this is totally arbitrary. What I might think is the sweet spot might not be what you think is the sweet spot. But again, the important thing is that you look at the detail too and make sure that you're not obliterating any detail your image might have had. So we could put that on just to get a better look at what we're doing. And again, I apologize, the processing takes a little while. Normally, you'll come to a point where it doesn't seem to do much anymore, and usually that's where I'll leave it or I'll back it off just a little bit from that point. You don't want to go, again, overboard on it because you'll lose the detail. And then we'll do a similar thing for highlights. I'll just like click it way up and look more in the highlights. And you can see there's artifacts in here and stuff, so I'm going to click it way down. When I say way up, way down, that's really relative to the position of the slider, down meaning towards the left, up meaning towards the right, not necessarily the actual effectiveness of the slider on the image, because I told you that kind of varies from image to image. All right, so this one doesn't seem to be having as much an effect on the image as this shadow adjustment did. Now the next ones are red and blue. A lot of times you get this color noise in your images. They're like little specks. They could be red, they could be green, they could be sometimes a cyan color, sometimes a more of a violet or purple color. So that's what these two sliders do. Now this image, the original image, if you look, you can see there is a little bit of color in here in these dots. And just the overall adjustments to begin with did a pretty decent job of getting rid of a lot of that noise, color noise. But then you could further affect it by doing these sliders. And again, I'll just use kind of these gross adjustments and move them around. Now in this image here, I don't think we're going to see much, and I'm not going to waste a lot of time on these two sliders. This clean color slider, a lot of times, especially on the background, when you have like a creamy bokeh on the background, you'll get a big blotch of color. And it's just noise for some reason. It's not like a lens flare or anything like that, but quite often it's just be like a green splotch. And I found it most often green. And that's what you would use this slider for. Again, I would do these gross movements to begin with, like all the way or far to the right, then far to the left, and then kind of hone in on the sweet spot. Now with this one, I don't have these large like swaths of color, so it really is not affecting this image much at all. Now what you might find as you're adjusting the images, your blacks start to turn a little bit gray, and you could get those back with this slider here. So you'd move this in just so your blacks become black again. And again, when you move that, not only are you looking at the black to make sure it's black, but you're going to be looking at to make sure you're not adversely affecting the noise or losing any detail. So you always keep that in mind when you move any of these sliders around. All right. So I'm pretty happy with the noise reduction as it is. It seemed to really reduce the noise very well in the shadow area. It didn't do as good a job in the highlights and these midtones. You could see that there are some artifacts in there, but it did a decent job. So I'm okay with that slider. The next one is detail recovery. A lot of times I spend more time here. What you have to be careful, I guess the main thing I could tell you about these three sliders is you could adjust it so you could get a lot of detail in your image, but you tend to get artifacts. And I'm going to adjust it to try to get artifacts. So you could see when I'm talking about what an artifact looks like. Okay. These are, one could argue it's noise, but it's really kind of an artifact. Um, right in here, you could see it's got these kind of like wormy looking black lines and wormy looking lighter lines. those are artifacts. And the trouble is with these sliders, you could adjust it so you could really increase the detail in the image, but then especially in these areas that are more smooth without a lot of detail to begin with, you start getting these artifacts. So you want to uh, like again, just move these up to where they're effective, but not up so far where you're starting to get artifacts. And there'll be a point where as you're moving it down, it doesn't seem to be affecting the artifacts anymore. That's the point where you just want to move it up just a little bit. Now add grain. There's a lot of times with an image that um, it doesn't look sharp if it's really clean. If you add just a tiny bit of a film grain look to the image, it looks sharper. It's kind of counterintuitive to what you might think. Uh, Personally, I always just move it all the way down. That's just the way I do it. It tends to, I don't care if it looks softer because I move it down. This is what I do. I move it all the way down. Now, debanding, I don't have an image with banding, but what that would be is when you have this noise, it's actually in a pattern going either horizontally or vertically, and you could get rid of it with these checkboxes, horizontal banding or vertical banding, and by moving this slider to help reduce it. Now, again, my cameras don't seem to do it, at least with the scenes I'm photographing, so I've never really had to worry about banding too much. A lot of times too, you might have a, let's say a telephone pole or vertical in the image, and you'll get banding off of that, horizontal banding off a vertical line, or vice versa. So that's what you would look for. So that I would consider this image done. So I would click OK. Now, again, this is going to take a while to save because of this screen recording software I have going. So I'm going to pause the video and we're going to come back in Lightroom and we'll compare it to the original image. Okay, we're back and we're in Lightroom and we have the two images side by side. This is the processed image with the noise reduced. Now, if we look right in here and I go to the original RAW file, and you could see, I hope so in the video, that there is a considerable amount of noise in this RAW file. And if I go back to the processed image, that noise is greatly reduced. Now I could zoom in a little more. There is the processed image, and here is the raw file. You can see that there is a lot of noise there. Now look at the detail in the feathers. This is the raw file, and this is the processed image with the noise reduced. You can see we really didn't lose any detail. So I'm really happy with the processing that Denoise did on this image. Now what I'd do next is I'd come in and sharpen this image. So I would go to detail and I would turn sharpening up. We'll just do quick sharpening like this to 70 type sharpening, and we'll zoom in again, and there is the processed image, and here is the raw file. Now you can see the noise in the raw file, and the raw file is not sharpened at all. Okay, so here is like this feather detail. We'll go back to our processed image. You can see that it's sharper because I sharpened it, and it doesn't have as much noise. So, I mean, I think Denoise did a great job on this image. A really, really nice job. So let's do another one, kind of the obligatory pet cat picture. Not a lot of noise in the image, although it was shot with a Fujifilm camera at ISO 6400. And you can see in his eye, there's quite a bit of noise there. So let's do this one. We're going to send it over to Denoise 6.0 right there. And it'll create the TIFF file. I'm going to edit the copy with Lightroom adjustments. I did forget to go back in and do detail down to 0. So it probably has that default setting of sharpening at 25. Probably because I don't recall if I did it already, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Well, still, you could see, mainly with this image, I want to show you my workflow, how I use Denoise. So I go in Denoise. I usually, again, I use this navigator to go over an eye. I usually bring it down to 100% though, so I could see a little more around the image and see the detail. I'll go right to a preset. In this case now it's Fujifilm X-T1 ISO 6400. And if I go to Fujifilm, I'm disappointed that there is not an X-T1 listed. They just have the X100T listed. But this Fujifilm camera uses the exact same sensor as the X100T. So I suspect that any of these would work fine. And that's what I encourage you. Don't get too discouraged if your camera isn't listed. If you find a camera that's close to yours, you don't, have the camera they're saying is listed, but something that came out around the same time and has the same sensor, use that. And we're going to use this. So we're going to go right away to ISO 400, and we're going to see the effect. And again, very little done there. There's the original. There's the processed. So we'll jump to 800 and wait for it to process. Very little done there. We're going to go to 1600. Now this was shot at ISO 6400, so typically my workflow would have been, I would have jumped right to 6400 if I really want to truly show you my workflow. And I could see it got rid of a lot of the noise. Then I would just compare it by going to 3200. And you could see the noise came back. So I would just jump right to 6400, got rid of the noise. I'd come over here. I normally don't do much with the noise reduction at all. What I will want to do, I probably want to look at a darker area, like in here, and see what the noise looks like, and there really is no noise to speak of. Then I'd probably want to go to a lighter area, which is like right in here, and see if there's really no noise to speak of. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next, I would just move it over an area that is very well focused on him. In this case, just probably I focused on his eye. So we'll leave it there. Then I'll go to detail recovery, and I just kind of plop this one around a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy on it. Didn't seem to do much that way. This is where it will have more an effect when I move it to the left. Seemed to bring out a little more detail in his eye, or it could have been my imagination. A lot of times too, if you're looking at this too long, everything seems to meld together. So you might want to take a walk away and come back, let your eyes rest a little bit. This reduce blur, again, I want to be careful with these three sliders of getting artifacts. Artifacts are going to be harder to pick up in this type of image with this fur, a lot of fine detail. So got to be, cognizant of that because it's really, might not be a problem. This add grain is pretty high with this camera preset at 0.4. So I'll turn it all the way down, and I really didn't see it do anything to the image. So looking at it now, I kind of like where it is just the way it is. We don't have to worry about debanding. We're just going to click OK. Now I'm going to pause the video again as this takes a while to process, and we'll be back in Lightroom in a second. Okay, we're back in Lightroom, and I have it set on the original raw file, and you could see the noise that we have in his eye. And we'll go over to the processed image, and you could see how that noise was greatly reduced. So there's the original raw file, and there is the processed image. Now there is not any sharpening done on this image. So then I would go over to detail and I would bring sharpening up, and we'll just bring it really quick, like in the 70s to there. So there is our processed image sharpened and with noise reduction, and there is the image that is not sharpened and does not have any noise reduction. And I think that Denoise did a great job on this image as well, in my opinion. So I really, really like the improvements they've introduced in Topaz Denoise 6. What I would suggest is go over to their website and look and see if your camera is listed as a preset. Again, it says here more presets will be added in future updates. So they have several in store. I think they don't mean in their store. They meant, in mind to add to this to their program. So you could look and see, as they said they're going to be adding it, and come back to this page to see when they're added. So that is it for this episode of the video series where we're looking at all the stuff in Topaz. We only have a few more to go. I'd like to thank everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon.